In my spare time, I make gaming videos and post them to YouTube. So far, people seem to enjoy my content, and I've gained a few subscribers along the way. However, I knew that I would be moving soon, so I informed my subscribers that my uploads would be slowing down for a while. It was Friday morning, the day of the big move. On my second trip to the new house, I brought my Xbox, my PS3, and all of my other gaming-related items with me. Upon arriving at the new house, I began to grab these items from the car. The next door neighbor kid saw my Xbox and came up to me running, smiling, and he asked me if I played Call of Duty. He was about 12 years old, super energetic, and honestly, he seemed a bit annoying. I told him that I did play Call of Duty, and he asked if we could play zombies sometime. I agreed and told him I would get his gamer tag from him once I was all set up. I said goodbye and walked inside. Later that day, I had finally finished getting all of my belongings into the new house. And though I was extremely exhausted from the move, I decided it would be fun to see how it was gaming in my brand new room. So I quickly set up my gaming area and turned on the Xbox. Upon booting up Call of Duty, I received a friend request. I didn't think much of it because I always tend to get random requests, but the message that followed shocked me. It said, "I'm your new neighbor. Want to play a game?" I was confused. How did he know my gamer tag? I didn't give it to him when we had talked earlier. Honestly, I was a little creeped out, but I figured maybe I got confused from being so tired. I forgot that I gave it to him. Honestly, I knew that wasn't the case, but I think I was just trying to convince myself that I wasn't losing my mind. So I hesitantly accepted the friend request. As I mentioned earlier, he was a young kid and he had a squeaky voice that made it hard to focus on the game. But worse than that, every few seconds I would hear what sounded like a blood-curdling scream off in the distance, coming through his microphone. It sounded like somebody was dying. It freaked me out a bit, but I figured maybe somebody was just watching a scary movie in the other room or something, and I brushed it off. That night when I went to go to sleep, I kept remembering the sound of those screams. It was really bothering me, wondering what they could have been. I tossed and turned for hours and couldn't fall asleep, so I decided I would go make something to eat. Maybe that would help me to get some much-needed rest. I made myself a small snack and sat down at the kitchen table, which was still cluttered with moving boxes, and began to eat. Suddenly, I heard a knocking at the back door. Who could be at the door at 3 in the morning, I thought. I was a little scared to open the door, but I did, and to my surprise, there was that little kid just staring at me. I asked him what he wanted and told him his parents would probably be pretty upset he was out so late. He didn't say a word, he just stared back at me with these big eyes that appeared to be pitch black in the darkness of night. Then suddenly he said, "I don't think they will mind," and he let out the creepiest laugh I've ever heard in my life. He turned to walk away and said, "Can we play tomorrow?" I said, "Yes, I will play with you tomorrow, just go home and get some rest." I shut the door and went to bed. I was freaked out, but I was so tired that I eventually passed out. In the morning, I decided to hop on and play my game for a while before undertaking the dreaded task of unpacking. I booted up the Xbox and was instantly bombarded with messages and invites from this little kid. I had just woke up and I didn't want to be bothered, so I just appeared offline. But the messages didn't stop. He said, "I know you're there. Please play with me." So finally, out of pure frustration, I shut off the Xbox and went to grab some breakfast. I finished my meal and walked towards the bedroom to begin unpacking. But to my shock, the Xbox was on, and there was an open message from the neighbor on my TV screen. It said, "Want to play a game?" I was freaked out. How did my Xbox turn on, and how was this message opened? I frantically checked to make sure all the doors were locked. I even checked every single window in the house. They were all shut and locked tight. How in the world did this happen? Finally, I convinced myself that I had forgot to shut it off, and eventually, out of curiosity, I joined his game. We played for about an hour, and once again, I started to hear those screams in the background. So this time, I asked him what the noise was, and he abruptly shouted, "Don't worry about it," and suddenly logged offline. I sat there baffled. I was concerned too. I mean, since I had moved in, I had never seen his parents. A couple of hours went by and I decided I would go over to his house and introduce myself to his parents. Upon knocking on the door, I heard a strange moan. It sounded as if somebody was hurt. No one answered the door, so I knocked again, and finally, the door slowly swung open. But it wasn't the parents who opened the door. It was the kid. He stared at me. His eyebrows hung low on his face. He looked very angry, but he didn't say anything. He just stared. I asked him if his parents were home, and he replied, "You cannot be here," and slammed the door in my face. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. Something wasn't right here. I had to go home and call the police, so that's exactly what I did. I called them and told them I was worried about my neighbor, and told them the situation. I gave them my address as I had forgot to see what his address was. They said somebody is on the way. Upon hanging up the phone, I heard a noise that was all too familiar. It was the sound of my Xbox powering on. I froze. The shock bled the red from my face and my heart started pounding out of my chest. I took a deep breath and slowly walked towards the bedroom door. I grabbed the handle and pushed the door open. The lights were off, but the room was illuminated by the television screen and a bright white light glowing off of the Xbox message saying, "Wanna play a game?" I slammed the door, ran into the living room, and turned on all the lights, and waited for the police. I was shaking. I had never been so terrified in my life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the police arrived. They asked which house the neighbor lived in, and I pointed them in the direction of his home. The officer looked at me with a puzzled look on his face and said, "Sir, we don't have time for pranks." I was confused. I said, "What do you mean? This is not a prank. I'm concerned about my neighbor. I haven't seen the kid's parents since I moved in, and I think he might be in the home all alone." The officer's face changed to a look of anger, and he demanded that I came with him. I was dumbfounded, but I followed him. I began to approach the house, and when we reached the front window of the home, he said, "Look inside." Upon looking inside, the house was completely empty. I did not understand. I pleaded with the officer to check inside, but he said, "No one is in this home. It's been vacant for the past 3 years. I began to argue with him, shouting that I knew somebody was in there. I even offered to show him the Xbox messages. At this point, he begins to laugh and says in a stern voice, "You want to pretend like you don't know what happened here?" I insisted that I had no idea what he was talking about. So after about 5 minutes of arguing with him, he looks me dead in the eyes and says, "The people who lived here were murdered by their own son." The boy was angry that they didn't pay attention to him. So one night, he grabbed his father's shotgun and shot both of his parents while they were sleeping. He then turned the gun on himself and ended his life. He then said, "We have important jobs to do. We can't have our time wasted with this nonsense. If you make a false call again, I will see to it that you are arrested." I knew he wouldn't believe me, so I just went back home. I was terrified, but in the weeks that followed, the messages had stopped. If it wasn't for the messages still sitting in my inbox, I would have thought that I just had dreamed the whole thing. It's been 5 months since this all started, but every once in a while, I hear a knocking at the back door. And this morning, when I turned on my Xbox, I got that message again.